The Verlactor did not fear many things. Rulers of 8 galaxies, their bodies coiled in scales forged by solar storms, and their minds sharpened by thousands of years of telepathic evolution, they considered themselves the apex of sentient life. For the dragons, language was more than communication. It was memory, identity, and power. It was believed only the blood of the stars could birth a mind capable of understanding Draconith, their sacred tongue. And yet, on the day Earth submitted its formal request to join the Council of Scales, the chamber erupted in laughter. "Let the mammals bark," scoffed High Scholar Cytherean. "They cannot speak beyond the limits of their flesh." Earth's envoy stood motionless in the center of the amphitheater. He was old, dignified, and dressed in ceremonial robes encoded with mathematical elegance. His voice didn't rise. He simply opened a holopad, projecting the credentials of one Elia Crane. 17, said Cytherean, his nostrils flaring with condescension. "Your champion is still a hatchling. We speak of cosmic archives, and you sent a child. She deciphers languages faster than most of our computers." The envoy replied calmly. "She is different." A pause, then more laughter. The chamber's central flame flickered in amusement. Cytherean coiled downward, his snout close to projection. "Then let her prove it. The first layer of the Draconith Codex. Decipher it, speak it, within 30 cycles. Or Earth will be marked as a curiosity, observed but never heard." The conditions were transmitted immediately. No assistance, no neural augmentations, no AI, only pure cognitive effort. Elia was to crack the first layer of the most complex language in the known universe. A code not even some lesser dragons could master. Back on Earth, she was eating cold noodles when the message arrived. Elia Crane had no entourage, no press coverage. She lived in a narrow apartment stacked with antique books and glowing screens. Her voice rarely rose above a whisper. She preferred symphonies to conversation, silence to debate. But when she read the council's terms, her lips curved. She didn't say yes. She just walked to her desk, pulled out a blank notebook, and wrote the word shape. Then sound. Then feeling. The next morning, she requested every audio archive ever recorded of the Verlactor. News briefings, battle commands, mating chants, even lullabies. She played them on repeat while mapping tonal variations. Every pause, growl, and inhalation became data points in a sprawling tapestry. To any observer, it looked like madness. Walls plastered in scrawled diagrams, floors cluttered with wires and notes. Sleep reduced to half-hour stints. But Elia wasn't drowning. She was listening, and what she heard terrified her. The dragons didn't just speak. They sang with memories encoded in vocal resonance. The same phrase shifted in meaning depending on emotional intensity, breathing pattern, and even temperature. Their speech was holographic. Each sentence layered with 3 or more simultaneous meanings: literal, emotional, ancestral. No existing software could translate that. But Elia wasn't relying on software. She started humming, not copying them, but following the frequency curves, matching rise and fall, studying what felt right. On day 5, she connected their breath patterns to Earth's traditional overtone singing. On day 6, she matched their stress markers to emotion-based languages like Kosa and Ainu. On day 7, she stopped using her tools. She began recording herself. Her voice was raw, her tones imprecise, but slowly, clarity emerged. A sound not heard from human lips before. Not mimicry. A language understood. She paused her recording and sat still. "This isn't a code," she whispered. "It's a memory. Every dragon speaks from the soul of their ancestors. Most humans would have quit, but Elia was never most humans. On the 10th day, she walked to the far wall of her lab and wrote a single word in bold red ink: emotion, not logic, not grammar. Emotion, that was the key. Elsewhere in the galaxy, the Council barely remembered her name. Cytherean mocked Earth's silence. She has likely abandoned the attempt. A pity. I almost expected a greater struggle. Our white HR, the youngest among them, tilted his head. She listens too long to be simple. A hatchling humming into a recorder is not listening. Cytherean sneered. "It's failing quietly." But Elia wasn't failing. She was evolving. She hadn't slept in 2 days, but her eyes glowed with focus. She mapped the dragon's triadic syntax to something she called a feeling matrix. Not a dictionary, a resonance chart, where the meaning of a word changed depending on vocalized empathy. It meant nothing to machines, but to her, it was a doorway. She turned on her recorder one last time and spoke 4 words. Not English, not mimicry, a phrase no human had ever formed. "My fire remembers peace." And the translation matrix flared to life. It pulsed. It responded. For the first time in recorded history, an alien AI confirmed. Layer 1 partially decoded. Elia smiled. She didn't rush to announce it. There was no dramatic flourish. No music. She simply filed her results, backed them up, and sat quietly as the sun rose behind the window. She had touched something sacred, something ancient. And now, the dragons would listen. The girl they mocked hadn't just translated their words. She had understood their soul. She didn't approach the language like a scientist. She didn't need to. Elia approached it like a human, guided by patterns, yes, but also by instinct. She had learned that the dragons didn't speak to transmit data. They spoke to project essence. That was the first failure of every machine translation. Computers search for logical correlations. Elia listened for intention. The more she examined the vocal structures, the more convinced she became that the language was deeply biological. She noticed the breath patterns resembled human sighs during grief, how the frequency shifts mimicked the cadence of a lullaby sung to a dying flame. The dragons weren't forming syllables. They were expressing layered emotional states, stacked like notes in a chord. And humans, biologically chaotic, emotionally intense, were perhaps the only species strange enough to feel their way into it. By day 12, she stopped trying to categorize the words at all. Instead, she sang, slowly, carefully, with the tones matching mood, then intent, then ancestry. Every phrase she practiced came alive only when her emotion aligned with its meaning. She could speak it wrong with perfect pronunciation, and it would fall flat. But speak it with the correct memory, pain, joy, yearning, and it resonated. The dragons had encoded emotion as syntax. Her process could never be replicated by software. It was imprecise, unpredictable, utterly human. The council remained dismissive. "She toys with our broadcasts," Cytherean muttered during a meeting. "Her species chases shadows." But our HFY had begun to study the reports differently. He isolated the frequencies of her test recordings. Then he heard it. Her voice, imperfect yet unmistakably correct, resonating with the first ancestral harmonic, something no translator had ever reproduced. "She's not mimicking," he said quietly. "She's learning how we remember. She's faking resonance." Another elder snapped. "Coincidence." Our YTHR disagreed, but held his tongue. He had seen something in her tones. A fragility dragons had long lost. The ability to feel without control, without fear. Maybe that was what made her dangerous. Elia didn't know of their doubts. She was buried in cross-linguistic comparisons. She began building bridges between the Draconid Codex and Earth's forgotten languages. She referenced tonal African dialects, how pitch transformed meaning. She pulled from whistled languages of the Amazon and overlaid them with breath-based communication from endangered Arctic tribes. Even Mongolian throat singing became relevant. In these earth tongues, she found fragments of the structure the dragons considered sacred. She began to suspect the unthinkable. Maybe Earth wasn't behind. Maybe Earth had simply evolved differently. And deeper still, maybe it had retained fragments of something older. She built her final matrix on a linguistic model that didn't rely on grammar, but emotional chords. A phrase in Draconid might mean, "Remember your mother's sacrifice," depending on the exact layering of tone and stress. But the core idea was not literal. It was a shared feeling passed through sound. You couldn't fake it. You had to remember it. Elia began meditating before every session, not for clarity, but to feel the emotion she needed to express. She wasn't inventing meanings. She was synchronizing with them. One phrase, when sung from a state of grief, meant honor. The same phrase, Sung with pride meant legacy. If sung with fear, it meant betrayal. This was why no machine could translate Draconith. It wasn't a code. It was a mirror of the soul. And Elia, somehow, was adjusting her soul on command. By day 25, she had constructed a vocal sequence that passed all simulated harmonic checks. When she tested on a training algorithm designed to recognize low-level dragon speech, it flagged her file as ancestrally encoded. She stood in her lab, exhausted but not defeated. The sequence didn't just sound right, it felt right, like the truth spoken aloud for the first time. But she knew it wouldn't be enough. The dragons wouldn't be impressed by mimicry. They would only listen if they recognized understanding. She began to memorize one final statement. Not copied, not translated, composed. In their language, in her voice, peace is the fire that remembers. 6 words, each carefully balanced with tones pulled from memory, pain, longing, and hope. She practiced them over and over until a breath that formed them no longer came from her lungs, but from her past. On the 29th day, she tested it in front of a prototype Relactor AI. The machine paused. Then pulse green. First layer authenticated. Secondary trace detected. Ancestral marker. Source, unknown lineage. Uncoded. She had done it. She didn't celebrate. Instead, she looked at her reflection in the dark screen. Her eyes were tired. Her voice was raw. But something inside her had shifted. She hadn't just solved a problem. She had reached across time, culture, biology, and touched the soul of the people who believed themselves unreachable. And she had spoken, not like a dragon, but as a human. The transmission reached the council just before the 30-cycle deadline expired. The chamber was quiet as the message played. There was no grand opening statement, no political dressing, just a voice, young, human, steady. And then the phrase, peace is the fire that remembers. The room changed. The flame at the heart of the council chamber flickered, not with light, but with resonance. Ancestral dragons, ancient and jaded, lifted their heads. Some narrowed their eyes, others uncoiled, not from fear, but recognition. They had heard their own language spoken many times by other species. Attempts, approximations, failures. But this was different. This was not mimicry or mechanical parroting. This was a human speaking with memory, not her own, but one that echoed theirs. The silence afterward was thick with disbelief. She cannot have known that phrase, murmured one elder. It belongs to the first firekeeper. Cytherean said nothing. The archive systems flickered to life automatically, cross-referencing thousands of years of preserved Draconith sequences. The phrase matched an ancient invocation, used once and only once, in a treaty between 2 dragon bloodlines at war. The inflection, the cadence, the emotional resonance, nearly perfect. Check for AI tampering, Cytherean snapped. No interference. The AI confirmed. Signal consistent with organic vocal strain. Biological vocal cords. Human. How? One whispered. Our YTHR stepped forward. Because she didn't translate it. She felt it. She reached for the root, not the leaves. The chamber was quiet again. She has passed the first layer, said the system, with ancestral resonance confirmed. Human designation, Elia Crane. For the first time in council history, a non-Draconith had not just spoken their language. She had spoken a part of their memory. It disrupted everything. The council was structured around superiority. Language was the gate. And no one, not the telepathic Illyrii, not the logic-born Synthrics, had ever crossed it. Yet a girl from a backwater planet had reached it alone. No implants. No gene modifications. Just a human brain. They called for an emergency hearing. Elia appeared via hologram. Tired, eyes ringed with sleepless focus, but composed. She didn't bow, didn't thank them. She waited. Cytherean stared at her long and hard. Do you understand what you've done? I think so, she replied. I touched something your people buried in sound. Why that phrase? Because you're not afraid of war, she said, but you are afraid of remembering peace. The chamber hissed in breath. Our YDHR looked at her closely. Do you know where that phrase comes from? I pieced it together from emotional overlays. I didn't know the history. I just knew it was important. That's impossible, Cytherean barked. No, our white HR said quietly. It's human. Ilya didn't flinch. You think we're too simple, too emotional. But emotion is the only way your language works. We didn't fall short of your code. We surpassed it. Cytherean tried to reclaim control. Even if this was real, one human does not speak for all. Earth is still untested. Then test us, Ilya replied, but not with your laws, with your memory. Give us a second phrase. A murmur spread through the chamber. She was challenging them, not from arrogance, but from understanding. Our YTHR nodded once. The second layer, then the codex adjusted. New parameters were transmitted. This one was far more complex. No phrases existed in current archives. It had been constructed from legacy fragments and emotional cords never before externalized by another species. We will give her 50 cycles, said Cytherean, though his voice had lost its smugness. No, Ilya said, give me 30 again. That silenced the room. Why? Our YTHR asked. Because if I take 50, you'll think I needed it. Arrogance, one might say. But what they saw in her eyes wasn't pride. It was clarity. The same kind dragons once carried in their prime, when words still meant truth and not politics. The request was approved. Ilya disconnected. Earth's leadership didn't interrupt her process. They had learned by now. She operated outside of systems. She didn't need bureaucracy, just data and silence. This time, she went deeper. She returned to ancient human music, songs that predated civilization, wordless lullabies, battlefield cries, funeral dirges. She pulled samples from cultures long extinct and layered them against dragon harmonic models. She wasn't building a sentence. She was building an emotion path. Day after day, she refined her pitch. She trained her breath control to the point of collapse. She rewired her emotional memory to recall specific states at will. Sorrow without tears, pride without ego, love without possession. It wasn't healthy, but it was working. The human voice had limits, but Ilya pushed hers until her lungs ached, until her vocal cords nearly ruptured. She recorded phrase after phrase. Then she sang a complete sentence derived from nothing but emotion and resonance. The system responded again. Second layer, 84% match. Ancestral intent detected. Encoding verified. Layer pass. The council received the second signal 2 days before the new deadline. They played the recording in stunned silence. No human had ever even heard the second layer, and she had spoken it, not translated, not recited, composed, from emotional alignment, from instinct, from something the dragons had nearly forgotten. Humanity. The dragons didn't announce their reaction. They didn't send a broadcast or craft a formal declaration. They simply appeared. On the edge of Earth's orbit, 3 draconid sovereigns arrived in living ships, creatures older than many stars. No weapons powered up, no threats, no conditions. They requested one thing: to meet the girl who had remembered something they themselves had lost. Ilya stood on the observation deck, eyes steady, breath controlled. She wasn't dressed in armor or politics, just human skin and will. The lead sovereign stepped forward, our white HR himself, his wings folded in respect. He did not speak common. He didn't need to. He opened his maw and released a phrase that resonated through the ship's structure, not as sound, but memory. An echo of mourning, reverence, kinship. The phrase had no translation, but Ilya understood it, because she had already begun dreaming in their language. She answered not with words, but with the same frequency, layered through her chest, her throat, her soul. It was imperfect, but it was real. The floor beneath them hummed with approval. Our white HR lowered his head. It was the closest gesture to kneeling their kind had ever shown. Cytherean watched from behind, his pride wounded but his silence intact. He could not refute what he saw, not because it was flawless, but because it was undeniably earned. The council convened days later, in full attendance. No human had ever stood inside the convocation ring. Until now, Ilia didn't arrive with Earth's diplomats. She arrived alone, and for the first time, the dragons did not question her presence. They didn't posture. They waited. Our white HR took the floor. In the days before speech became protocol, our language was a living thing, he said, voice echoing a way that bypassed the ears and hit the spine. Only those who remembered, not memorized, could wield it. He turned to Ilia. She is the first non-dragon in 10,000 cycles to speak not our words, but our memory. The chamber remained utterly still. She did what no algorithm could. She did what no empire has done. She felt her way through the dark and found us. He gestured to the codex, now updated with a new classification. Linguistic breach achieved by species. Homo sapiens. Status respected. Cytherean stepped forward. His pride was acid in his throat. But even he understood that denial would fracture the Council's credibility. Then let it be recorded, he said. Earth shall no longer be classified as primitive. No, our white HR said, voice calm. Earth shall be classified as something worse. A hush swept the chamber. Earth is not primitive. It is unpredictable. It cannot be measured by scale or code, because they evolve through will, not instruction. He looked at Ilia again. From this day forward, humanity shall be listed as an anomaly. Ilia didn't smile. She simply bowed her head. She didn't need victory. She had already changed the narrative. The Council updated its records. Earth was moved out of the observation tier and placed under cultural hazard level red. Not because it posed military danger, but because it could change meaning. One girl, without weapons or armies, had redefined communication across species. And in doing so, she had redefined value. Her name became myth. But Earth didn't celebrate her as a savior. They celebrated her as a signal that humanity, despite its chaos, still carried something the galaxy had forgotten how to measure: soulful intellect. Not cold genius, but the burning kind. The kind that doesn't stop just because the path isn't mapped. Decades later, when the Galactic Concord rewrote their first contact protocols, they based them on emotional-linguistic resonance studies, fields pioneered by Ilia's work. Every diplomatic team was required to include not a translator, but a human, preferably one under 30, because no algorithm could predict what a human heart might say. The dragons never waged war with Earth. They didn't need to. They had already lost. Quietly, completely, when they realized the smallest human could reach further into their past than they themselves dare to go, and somewhere far from politics and planets. Ilia sat in silence, listening to a song only she understood. She didn't conquer them. She reminded them. And in doing so, she didn't just speak their language. She changed it forever.